Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. This is a quick and a bit more of an informal tutorial for those who would like to use GIMP to manipulate textures within Final Fantasy XI. Now, working with textures in GIMP differs from Photoshop in the sense that GIMP handles alpha channels quite a bit differently than Photoshop does, and it can be kind of confusing. So let's jump right in and I'll show you some of the basics. So the first thing you want to do is export the desired textures from Final Fantasy XI using the methodology described in my previous tutorial. If you haven't seen that yet, go ahead and check it out. Once that's done, you're going to want to go ahead and open your texture in GIMP. We're going to use this texture right here. Now I've already edited this in Photoshop, but that doesn't matter. The workflow is going to be exactly the same. So once you go ahead and open a DDS file in Photoshop, it's going to bring up this little dialog box here. And what you're going to want to do is uncheck load mipmaps. You don't need that information when you're editing the texture. And when you go to save the new texture when you're done, it's going to create some new mipmaps anyway. So just make sure that's unchecked. Okay. So here's our texture, and this is the problem right here. This is how GIMP differs from Photoshop. GIMP handles the alpha channels quite a bit differently. It almost treats them as an alpha mask. So what we need to do first is essentially remove that. So in the top right hand corner, go ahead and click on the Channels tab. And we're just going to uncheck the RGB channels and then click on them to unselect them. So now we're just working with the alpha channel. The first thing you want to do is right click on the alpha channel and duplicate it. And that's going to create a backup copy of the alpha channel, which we're going to use later when we put this all back together. So even if it looks like it's selected, go ahead and click on the alpha channel again. And then over on the left-hand side, go ahead and select the paintbrush tool. You're going to want to select a white color here so that nothing is transparent. And crank up the size of your brush nice and large. We're just going to paint over the alpha channel. There we go. So now, if we turn on the RGB channels again, we can see the entire texture. So at this point, you can go ahead and do whatever it is you need to do to edit your texture. You can paint over top of it, or you can copy and paste whatever layers you need to in here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and quickly create a few layers so you can see an approximation of what you would encounter when you're working on textures in GIMP. Okay, so I've created a few layers over here in the Layers panel. And this is a closer approximation of what you might have when you're editing layers in GIMP for Final Fantasy XI. Now, first and foremost, of course, you're going to want to go ahead and save your file. Typically, you'll want to save this as an XCF file. This is the equivalent to Photoshop's PSD in the sense that it'll retain all your layers. So you want to make sure you keep saving this file as you go along. So now that our texture is done and looking beautiful, what you want to do is jump up to Image here in the top left, and then select Flatten Image. Now this is important because again, because of the way GIMP handles the alpha channels, we want an alpha channel that affects the entire texture as a whole. So we need to make sure you flatten the image. And then over here in the Layers panel, you're going to right click on your texture and you're going to add a layer mask. And then down at the bottom, select Channel. Now this is the alpha channel that we backed up before. So this is why we made a backup copy of that alpha channel. So once you've selected that, you're going to click Add. And there we are. Now, one last thing to do is right click on this and then apply layer mask. And then we're done. So if we jump back over into channels here, we can see that our alpha channel is now back and this texture is ready to go. So what we're going to do is top left corner, click on File, Export As. We're going to call this Test 3. And we're going to make sure it's a DDS. And then click Export. In just a moment, the Save DDS dialog box is going to come up. For compression, we're going to choose DXT3. And for mipmaps, we're we're going to make sure that it generates bitmaps. You don't need to worry about any of the advanced settings. Just go ahead and click on OK. All right, so that texture is now ready to go and import back into Final Fantasy XI. And if we jump into Photoshop here to take a look at it, test 3, we can see that the entire texture is here. And if we take a look at the alpha channel has been restored to the file. So this is definitely ready to import back into Final Fantasy XI. I hope this has been helpful for some of you. I know that not everyone has access to Photoshop. So by using these basic steps, this should give you a quick head start in GIMP. Thanks for watching and take care.